to U.S. history, notes 5.9, these are going to cover Gerald Ford and his presidency. So he becomes number one when Nixon resigns. He becomes president. So Ford is president. He is the last American president who will be involved in the Vietnam War. So he is the one who is our last one involved in the Vietnam War. We've already talked about the Vietnam War, so you should have kind of an idea about that and what happened under Ford. So he is the one who is president as we are pulling troops out and as our embassy fails. He had to take some serious, decisive action. He had to make a lot of decisions in both the domestic policy here at home and foreign policy. But he ends up being tainted by Nixon and his scandal and can't ever really recover from that. He actually pardons Nixon. I think I mentioned that under Nixon's. And he was picked by Nixon to be his vice president when Nixon's first vice president, Agnew, had to resign. So Ford really is tied to Nixon, seen as maybe part of his corruption, and he never really gets away from that. So that really hurts Ford being tied to Nixon, and here we see Ford and Nixon together. So what happened domestically in the U.S. during Ford's presidency? Well, he had some domestic issues. He had inflation and stagflation. Inflation is the rise in costs of goods. So inflation, here we see the balloon, it gets bigger and bigger, so costs get bigger and bigger. But people aren't making any more money, so it's like they cost more money, and you don't notice a difference. Stagflation is where you combine this whole idea of being stagnant with inflation. So inflation is high, cost of goods is rising, and job growth is not. So it is staying the same. So in inflation, things are rising. So costs are rising, but growth is staying the same. So people don't have more money in order to pay more. So like if you talk to your grandparents about the amount that something might cost, they might say, oh, that only cost 25 cents when I was a kid, and now it costs $1. Well, the amount people make has also gone up. So inflation kind of can work out okay, but if you have no rising economy and prices going up, people essentially have less money. So Ford actually used his power of veto 55 different times to try to stop inflation, to battle it. He wasn't able to stop it, but he was able to save the U.S. over $9 billion. So he was really working to not spend that money to help the U.S. Another issue that came up under Ford was OPEC and their control. OPEC is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. These are countries, and here you can see them on the map, that actually organized in 1961 or 1960 to basically, they're the countries that sell the most oil in the world. And their idea was to organize and set oil prices in 1960. So that's what they did. They all sell their price for the same amount, and they set how much each of them can sell. Well, they started using it as a political and economic weapon in the early 70s, which means oil prices are going to rise. So you can see here, oil prices, this is 1973. This is 1974. You see a huge increase in oil prices and the cost of oil during this time because the different countries in OPEC, most of which are in the Middle East, are using this as a weapon, as a way to pressure the U.S. and other countries to do what they want. So the U.S. responds. They really don't have much of a response. OPEC also puts an embargo on oil. They stop shipping oil to countries that support Israel. So a lot of this has to do with the Middle East, like I said, and Israel. Israel and Arab nations in the Middle East were fighting, and if the country supported Israel against the Arab nations, they just didn't sell them oil. Well, the U.S. supported Israel, and our prices go up over 200% in just a matter of months. That's huge, and people can't keep paying them. And we saw the graph already, so you see that. So this leads to an oil shortage. So it adds to inflation, which means demand is high. We need oil. We have cars. Supply is low, costs rise. We actually have running out of gas, people not having enough. gas stations running out of gas, lines for people waiting. This is a big problem and doesn't really look good for Ford. So domestically, Ford was having problems. Foreign policy-wise, like we said, Ford ends the war in Vietnam. He also continues to pursue détente with the Soviet Union and China that Nixon did. He's really doing Nixon's policies. In addition, he has the Helsinki Accords, where basically there is a summit, the US, Canada, Europe, the Soviet Union is also here, where they agree to cooperate economically, respect existing boundaries, and promote human rights. So we're starting to really get along a little bit better with others, including the Soviet Union. Now, Ford's foreign actions also include what's called SALT, or the Strategic Arm Limitations Talks. There is a SALT 1 and a SALT 2. Ford is going to be part of SALT 1. This is between the US and Russia. We limit the arms race, especially nuclear weapons. We actually agree to get rid of nuclear weapons, not have as many in SALT. So that's huge. That's a huge step towards détente, easing of tensions in the Cold War. And here you can see on the chart, 1975 is SALT 1, and you can see the Soviet Union is still increasing warheads, but they did get rid of nuclear, some other weapons. The US starts to lessen, but by 85, the Soviet Union also drastically drops. So as I said, we had more than one SALT, but this is the start. Now, Ford is defeated in 1976, so he becomes president, but he is tainted by Nixon and Nixon's scandals. So in 1976, Ford runs against Jimmy Carter. He is associated with Nixon's corruption. Americans don't trust him, and he loses. And our next president is Jimmy Carter. And we will talk about Jimmy Carter in your next set of notes.